Hello and welcome to Interviewing Techniques, a Train the Trainer training video to help you prepare to teach your job-seeking clients how to prepare for a job interview. In this presentation, which this is the same presentation that you'll be using as you do a presentation for your job-seeking clients, you will find each one of the slides, and then there's a notes section that clearly describes what you could, should, would say on each one of the slides. That doesn't mean that you should read from the notes, but it really does help you prepare for what it was kind of designed to say. You'll find that in this Train the Trainer, I will kind of wear two hats, and one of them I will present it like you would present it to a job seeker, and then in the next hat I'll be talking to you as the trainer and trying to prepare you on what to say here, how to say it, and that kind of a thing if there's a handout that we're going to talk about. So here, we're just going to really congratulate them for landing the interview. Remember that up to this stage, everything has led up to them actually getting the job interview. So in all the steps leading to the interview, they've had the opportunity to control what the employer knew about you, because it's what you presented in your resume, what you put on the application, and what you put in your cover letter. Now, your preparation pays off during this interview. So they're going to want to focus on their positive qualities. They're going to use this opportunity to make sure that the employer remembers them in a positive light and to get those results, to get hired. That's the whole idea. So we're going to want to make sure that you include the following. A USP, or a unique selling proposition. We want employers to know what makes the job seeker different. What is their unique selling proposition? What makes them the best candidate? They want to separate themselves by offering up unique qualifications. What do they bring to the job? They want to tie their skills to the specific job requirements. And they want to quantify those skills if at all possible. Interpersonal skills. This is their opportunity to show off their professional, verbal, and nonverbal skills. Active listening, motivation, flexibility, patience, empathy. All of these things can really come out during a job interview, and we want them to. And finally, this is their opportunity to ask questions and to get a feel for the specific job and the company itself, because it's important that it's a good fit. You will find these section slides in each one of the trainings, and this is our first section, the first impression. So what we're going to do is just kind of let them know in a brief synopsis of what we're going to cover in the upcoming slides. So it's going to go something like this. At the interview, you can expect to be judged, and that is a little bit overwhelming, but it's really never been more true than it is today. They're going to be judging the way that you look, so you're going to want to dress appropriately. They're going to judge the way that you act. Body language is at least 60% of our communication efforts. The way that you talk, communication skills are one of the highest rated, if not the highest rated transferable skill for any profession. And how can you prove it? By the way that you talk. And also the way that you behave in certain scenarios. And when they ask questions in the interview, the answer to those interview questions are the best way for the employer to surmise how they might react in a similar situation. Those are called behavioral questions, and we'll tackle each one of these topics. We'll also talk about the different types of interview questions that they can expect and the best responses. Every employer is a little bit different, and they might even judge the cleanliness of your car. So you want to be prepared from the moment that you get on the property. Dress for success. Dressing for success will give you a competitive edge and a positive first impression. In a recent survey of hiring managers, half of the interviewers said that candidates should be eliminated if not dressed appropriately. That seems a little bit crazy and very scary. But before we dive in covering how to dress professionally, consider the first rule to interviewing attire. Find out how the employers are likely to dress and then go one step further. So how will you know that? Well, don't go stalk the interviewer and wait in the parking lot to check them out. However, you can stop by the office for a visit to check out how the current employees are dressed. If you know someone who works there, ask them. Depending on the type of business, you might even be able to ask an employee on your visit. Check out their website. You might find some pictures of them hard at work. Social media sites tend to have even more pictures to browse through, so check out Facebook or LinkedIn, Twitter. A general rule of thumb is to dress professionally but comfortably. Your confidence is more telling than your attire, and you aren't going to be confident if you aren't comfortable. Also, nothing too flashy. You don't want to distract your interviewer with your flashy shoes, jewelry, or top. And now is not the time to be fashionable. Be businesslike. We're going to go over a couple of different options as far as dressing professionally, but I like to just think about it like Sunday best. This is new information. According to a recent news report, these colors rate high on the list of colors to purposefully wear to your interview. And each has a different perceived emotion or an attitude that is linked to it that you can then project. So they further suggest that you choose your clothing colors so that they match the company colors, which we're also suggesting that you do with the resume and the cover letter these days. So that's a thought as well. In the next 3 slides, what we're going to find are 3 different tiers of interviewing clothes and kind of what's appropriate for each. And I really like the little captions here on each one of these. And I did put where they can get this information and where I got these graphics. This first tier of interviewing attire is the bare minimum, and this is the church clothes. So even for an entry-level job at a fast food restaurant, you're going to want to look like you cared enough to pick out an outfit that makes you look professional. This style is going to be very informal, although you can show your personality a little bit. Be careful. If you wonder if it's too informal, it probably is. So err on the side of caution and step up your game. When you give advice to gender non-binary or non-conforming people, encourage clients to dress within the accepted style shown here for the gender expression that they feel the most comfortable with, and to present themselves in such a way during the interview process as well. So if they identify as a woman, dress as a woman. Here's our second tier. The second tier of interviewing attire is business casual. And we've added a sweater or a sports coat to spice it up a little bit and a little bit nicer pants. It's the most common style for interviewing. Notice that it's not a matched set necessarily. It's just kind of a step above where we were. And here's your third tier of interviewing. It's very conservative. But if you're interviewing for a professional job at, say, a lawyer's office or an accounting firm, this is how you're going to want to dress. So you're going to have a matching suit, and you're going to have a little bit fancier shoes. You're going to have more of a formal attire, probably a tie if you're a man. And of course, if we're going to show you what you should do, here's what we shouldn't do. These are good examples of clothing choices to steer clear of. So avoid clothing with words or ads on them. Jeans, shorts, or activewear, nothing too tight or showing cleavage or midriff. Think conservative, modest, and professional when you're dressing for an interview. When you're thinking about how you're presenting yourself, keep in mind that you don't want to give them a reason to form a bias, like your favorite football team or a Nike shirt. Maybe they have something against the product, so just err on the side of caution. Now we're moving on to accessories and whatnot. So all the additional things that we want to make sure we talk about. And keep in mind that when you're working with job-seeking clients, these folks need to hear the hard things that we need to say. Sometimes we have to tell them that they have to take a shower, that they have to take care of their hygiene. And those are conversations that this is the right time to have those conversations. Now, no matter the level of professionalism that you choose, think conservatively. So too short of a skirt or too tight of a blouse, too low cut of a shirt, these are going to not make a good impression for sure. So less is more is the theme when we consider all accessories. If you wonder if something is inappropriate, remove it or cover it up. take out the nose ring, remove your gauges, don't wear 16 bracelets, enhance your outfit, but don't overwhelm it. The rule of thumb with jewelry is to not wear anything cheap and to stick to one or less. So this is true of rings on your hand, of bracelets, of earrings, one per ear, none for men. As far as cologne is concerned, or really anything with fragrance, like even a lotion, you should arrive lightly scented, if at all. Overpowering scents are not the answer to your hygiene needs. Some people, especially young people, they'll spray a bunch of cologne on thinking that they're, hiding their body odor, and if anything, it might even make it worse. So some people, you'll have to remember, are super sensitive to smells, and you may not just turn them off, but it might actually trigger some kind of a memory, or might even make them sick. You never want to trigger a negative memory. That's actually called an encapsulated unit, a memory that's tied to a sense, and smell is one of the strongest. I think about fresh baked bread, and I think about my grandma. The same thing can happen with a cologne or a perfume. If they smell your perfume and it reminds them of a time that was really negative, a teacher that was horrible, or a student or something, that might then trigger them into thinking negatively about you. So better to steer clear. But similarly, reeking of smoke is a turnoff as well. So wait until after the interview to have a cigarette if you do smoke. Handbags. Purses, handbags, backpacks, briefcases, whatever it is, keep it professional. Something that's a dark neutral color, something that can hold your resume, but not a second set of clothes. If you have to bring a purse or a bag, and I know that, some folks use the bus, they don't have a choice, they have a bag, they have a big heavy coat, whatever. First of all, make sure that that purse or the bag is closed so that the contents don't just come spilling out in the middle of the interview. Along those same lines, empty your pockets so that you don't have them bulging out, you don't have keys falling out of your pockets and whatnot. One option with like a backpack that you might have to bring with you is to ask somebody at the front desk or another coworker there if maybe they can stick that somewhere that's a safe place so that it's out of the way and they aren't using it to judge you in any way. Hair and makeup. Isn't this a great little picture of that gal from Drew Carey? She was, wow, crazy. Keep it simple and conservative. So nothing like this picture, nothing big and flashy, less is more. And this is true of fingernails and fingernail polish as well. I'm not really sure where tattoos fit into this conversation, but do consider them before an interview because it can make a negative impression too. So if you can cover them up, do cover them up is kind of the rule of thumb. And personal hygiene matters. Absolutely, these things should be a given, but do shower, wear deodorant, comb your hair, trim and clean your fingernails, check your teeth to make sure that you don't have things stuck in them, brush your teeth. These are all super important items. Other items. There are a handful of things that you should bring with you. You should bring a copy of your resume or more. If you expect a panel interview, you'll want to bring one for everybody. Same goes with a cover letter and a reference sheet. If you expect a panel interview, we'll bring one for every single person. You'll probably want to bring your picture ID and a social security card in case you do get hired on the spot, a notebook and a pen, and your cheat sheet. And you'll see this handout later and we'll talk about it a little bit later, but it's a great tool to bring with you to the interview. You can keep that tool. It has some important information to kind of remind you throughout the interview. And there's a spot on there where you can put who interviewed you so you can thank them later. You can use that notebook also to write down the interviewer's name and address. I usually ask for a business card. If they have one, that works out really well. Just kind of tuck that in your pocket. Leave your coat, your hats, your gloves, your cell phone, your water bottle in the car. Just leave it all if you can. If that's not possible, make sure that your phone is turned off and that it's put away. Not just on vibrate because we can hear that. Off and put away. Ask somebody for a place to leave that bag or the coat like I mentioned. And before you exit the car, check your appearance in the mirror. Look up your nose, look at your teeth, make sure you don't have any salad sticking in there. And as last minute items, and I always get a joke or a laugh when I say this thinking it's a joke, but it's so very real. Check to make sure that your zipper is zipped. Check to make sure that your bra straps aren't showing. We women, we have shirts that have these little, usually plasticky or like ribbon-like things that they helps keep the top on the hanger or the purse on the hanger, but a lot of times they like to stick out on us. Make sure that those are all tucked inside. It's kind of just that last look, and sometimes this occurs like in the bathroom of the place before your actual interview, but just make sure you give yourself that last glance. Body language. So we talked about how body language is over 60% of your communication skills, and that is absolutely true, if not closer to probably 75%. Interviewers are going to be judging the way that you act as well as the way that you look. There are 4 types of body language that play a role in the way that you're perceived, and each one is super important. So there's eye contact, and what you'll find is on this slide, and many of the slides, you'll be clicking to move yourself along the way. So we click to bring out eye contact. And this shows you your interest in the person, what they're saying, and that you're confident and that you're sincere. So make sure that you're making eye contact. One thing that I notice in a job interview is very often the interviewer will be looking down and feverishly writing notes. And how are you, the one being interviewed, supposed to make eye contact when their head is down? And the best information that I ever got was at a mock interview. I totally suggest a mock interview for everyone. And this was just to look at the top of their head while they're making notes. That way, when they do look up, you're going to be making eye contact with them, and they're going to see that eye contact right off the bat. The next one is facial expressions. And this so matters. Look at her face there. This really makes a difference. Practice thoughtful, inquisitive expressions and smiling. Look in the mirror and practice that. Smile, and not like a fake smile, but just kind of a happy. Like when you think of the word smile or the word happy, what happens to your face is that these muscles pull it up into a happier look and a happier feel. And also that thoughtful, and especially in an interview when they ask you a question, oh yeah, I'm thinking about this one, even if you know exactly what the answer is going to be for you. Next is gestures. Using your hands as you talk can add value, but it can also be very distracting. You also want to be mindful of fidgeting, jiggly leg syndrome, nervous habit. One of the worst things that you could do is to be clicking your pen. Make sure that you don't do any of those nervous habit things. The best thing is just to put your hands in your lap and, not if you're one of those nervous habit kind of people, keep both feet on the floor so that you don't have to worry about that jiggly leg syndrome kind of a thing. Another thing to keep in mind is that mimicking the other person's body language can really help you to form a connection, and it can help you to both feel more comfortable. So if they're leaning in, you lean in. If they, turn their head, you turn your head. You just kind of mimic the way that they are behaving. And I think one of the most important is posture. It shows that you're confident, it shows that you're professional and that you're prepared. It just really changes the entire atmosphere and the way that you look and behave. So consider that posture in everything that you do and try to make a mental note of sitting up straight. I know it's hard, but try. Another tip that I read recently is to project that air of confidence is to elongate your neck. So the area between your ear and your shoulder, and this is going to make you sit up straight. It's going to open up your throat to help you project confidence as well and to help you project your words. When we get nervous, we tend to talk quieter. We tend to mumble a little bit, but if you stretch that area out, you feel more confident and you're more likely to project your voice. It's also recommended to speak on your out breath, which was interesting to me, and I had to practice it a few times, but it's supposed to make you sound more comfortable and more confident. I feel like I always speak on my out breath, so I was a little confused about that, but I like to include the newest of new news for you. Nonverbal communication. So when this is from a study, and there's always going to be in the notes section, you're going to find my link of where I got this information, so you can click there to find out more. But when asked to identify the biggest body language mistakes that job hunters make during an interview, hiring managers named the following. So number 1 was failure to make eye contact, and that was 68% of people. So that's a pretty big one. And again, keep an eye on that top of the head so that when they do look up, you're making eye contact. Failure to smile, 38%. So we just talked about that one too. Make sure that you're smiling. Even when you're just waiting for them and they're writing down notes or whatever, think about the word smile, and your face with that will have that resting smile face. The third one is playing with something on the table. So keep your hands folded in your lap if you're one of those people that tend to get fidgety. And number 4 was fidgeting too much in your seat, 32%. So be careful of the jiggling foot. Number 5 was bad posture with 31%. So you can see that they all fall right in line with those things that we just talked about. The rest of the items on the list are just kind of reminders of things not to do. Crossing your arms over your chest was 31%. Playing with your hair or touching somebody's face. The handshake is too weak. The handshake is too strong was also on the list at number 10. And using too many hand gestures at 13%. So speaking of the handshake, I understand that during the pandemic, it kind of brought on these unprecedented times. The employer might not want to shake hands for fear of spreading germs. It's best to take their lead. If they want to shake your hand, shake away. If not, then mention that you would be inclined to shake, but if you mention it, that's almost like shaking their hand. It's as respectful. You don't want to underestimate that handshake. It is so important. It's a crucial part of your introduction and your exit. A good handshake shows that your confidence and your respect. And if you've shaken somebody's hand before, you know that too weak of a handshake is too strong of a handshake is, oh my gosh, this is a lumberjack that I'm working with here. So it really should be somewhere in between. So some tips: stand up to shake their hand. Don't do that in a sitting. Make sure that your hand is dry. No one wants to touch your sweaty hand. If you are nervous and your hand is sweaty, wipe it off on your pants, on your skirt, on your dress. Wipe it off first. That is better than that sweaty hand in your hand. That's just, it's gross. Maintain eye contact as you greet them. Say something nice like, hello, pleasure to meet you, sir. Smile as you're shaking their hand. That's a super important piece. Make eye contact. Give a firm but not too firm, confident squeeze, so make sure you're doing a little bit of a squeeze, and hold that shake for 2 to 3 seconds. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. The key is a firm but not overpowering squeeze, and the pump up and down should only be once or twice, never more than 3 pumps. 1, 2, 3. And if it's a virtual interview, just mentioning a virtual high five or sending a handshake from here or mentioning good to see you, those things offer that virtual contact and it substitutes that tried and true handshake. So again, mentioning it is almost as good as doing it in person. You will almost certainly be asked a question about communication skills. And really, you think about how are we going to prove our communication skills? And the way that you communicate from the minute that you walk in the door is telling that story as well. So be professional and courteous to everyone, even that receptionist. I once had a receptionist that would filter out my resumes before they got to me. And one of the things that I told her was to please, in pencil at the top of the resume, jot down her first impression of these people. And these people weren't coming for an interview. This was them just dropping it off. And it's amazing how much that just mattered. So remember that every communication that you're having with that employer really does matter. You want to remember when you're there to choose your words carefully. You can only make a first impression once, and they say that the first 10 words that you say make that impression. So consider those first 10 words. So we'll start with small talk and work our way around clockwise. You'll see most of the screens will work that way. Small talk is a great way to show your personality, but let them take the lead on the conversation topic. Don't engage in a discussion about politics or anything controversial, even like cats versus grizz. You just don't want to put yourself in a position where now there's a little bit of conflict. The key here is to engage in small talk, but always leave an opening to close that conversation and move on to the topics at hand. So if you're talking to the receptionist, you don't want this long drawn out conversation when the boss comes up and says, I'm ready for you. You want to be able to just nip it in the bud and you're done talking. The second point here, we tend to talk faster when we become nervous. So make sure that there's a cognizant effort in your brain to slow down your speech. Another common issue is being too quiet when we lack confidence. So we kind of mumble a little bit and we start to whisper, and that's not going to get you the job. You really do need to speak up. And also, we want to be thorough but succinct. So the interviewer, think about this, they're very busy. They probably have 5 or even 10 interviews scheduled that day. Be respectful of their time by not dragging an answer on and on. You want to answer thoroughly, but make sure that you keep it as concise as you can too. And the last one here, the best thing that you can do is to prepare and to practice, practice, practice. Even if you have a great response memorized and at the ready, make sure that your answer looks thoughtful. So I like to take 5 or 10 seconds to pause before answering. So they ask me a question like, why do you want this job? And I thought this one over. And so I go, I think the reason I want this, so I count to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe even 10 before I answer that question, so that they know that it's thoughtful response and it's not just a canned reply. One recommendation is to incorporate a positive personality trait into every question, bookending answers with personality. This is their chance to find out who you are personally and to get a feel for your personality and if they think that you're going to fit with the team. So good to squeeze that information. The attitude does speak volumes. People are going to hear your words, but they feel your attitude. So you want to make sure that you have a great attitude regardless. It separates those winners from the losers. It can be more important than experience, and it makes a statement. So make sure that everything that you say, you flip it onto the positive if at all possible. If you act enthusiastic and eager, the impression is that you're going to be enthusiastic and eager worker. If you act like a negative Nancy, the impression is that you're going to be a negative Nancy at work. If you're too timid or you're too quiet, it implies that you're going to need a lot of supervision. Managers are looking for somebody who's motivated and who's excited about coming to work. So show that you're motivated and that you're excited to be at the interview. All right, so we made it through that first section, and now we're moving on to the next section, which is different types of interviews. So we'll describe the different types of interviews, and then we'll go on to talk about the interview questions and the different types of questions that people are asked, and then kind of what the best way to respond to those questions are. So on this screen, we're going to talk about how job interviews are offered in person, but also over the phone or virtually. Most of the advice for in-person interviews applies to phone and virtual as well, but we will go over some specific tips for virtual interviews as they've become very prominent recently. And I don't think they're going away. They seem to be the trend. Usually employers these days are starting out with a virtual or a phone interview or maybe one of each, and then they move on to the in-person to kind of filter through to those last applicants. So the different types of interviews, you have structured and unstructured. So a structured interview is going to ask a particular set of predetermined questions, and each applicant is asked that same exact question, and it provides easy comparisons for applicants. It's what we suggest we at Job Service are suggesting to businesses, because you want to be as fair as you possibly can. Questions are going to be based on skills and experience, and probably that are listed directly in the job description. An unstructured interview is going to be where questions are asked. They're not prepared in advance. Those interviews are much more informal or even casual. They often are more like a conversation. Your communication skills and your ability to think on your feet will come into play. Those kind of interviews often happen like at a coffee shop or over lunch or something like that. There's also semi-structured, and this is where the interviewer has a set of a few questions aside that they're going to ask to everybody, but the rest are not planned, and they just kind of arise spontaneously in a kind of a free-flowing conversation. And they tend to be a little bit less intimidating, and you might not know which one of these you're going to get. It's not like they're going to tell you we're going to do a structured interview. I mean, you can ask, but they might not even, know what they're going to do yet. So it does pay to know a little bit about the different types of interviews that employers use so that you can prepare yourself accordingly. So there are traditional interviews, and these are those one-on-one with a manager, maybe a recruiter or a supervisor. They are usually offered on site, on the business site, in an office or maybe in a conference room. Panel interviews are also very common, especially in bigger organizations. 2 to 9 interviewers will usually ask a set of predetermined questions, and they usually rotate who asks the question, although they're all taking notes and they're all going to score you, and then they're going to take all those scores together later and try to determine who was the winner. They're usually offered on site or in a conference room, or maybe even virtually. A lot of times they'll have people from all over the state all piped in to a virtual call. And they're going to direct your answers to the group there. So if one person asked you the question, yes, they asked the question, but everybody's writing down their notes. So make sure that you're eye contact with everybody and you're answering the whole group, not just that one person. There's sequential interviews, and these are separate interviews with different people. So perhaps management or HR and supervisors, and they may ask the same or different questions. Treat each interview as a separate interview. And there's also on-the-spot interviews, and these are offered when a person applies. Always be prepared to interview. So when you go in and you drop off an application or a resume, go dressed for success and be prepared for an interview right on the spot just in case. And then there's working interviews, and these are interesting, and they're gaining a little bit of traction. They're offered to see how you're going to interact with employees and under certain work conditions. Note they must be paid opportunities. It's illegal to have a working interview where they're expecting you to work and then you aren't going to get paid. But prepare by establishing expectations up front, pay attention to details, and be enthusiastic. My son had an interview at I guess it was a vet clinic, I think, and it was for an animal, like a kennel assistant, and they were cleaning out kennels and whatnot. And at the interview, he said, we're going to have a short interview, and then after that, I'm going to have you work half a day. And he gave him $100 to work half of a day and just follow around another kennel tech and do the job. And when my son got done with that, he realized that he did not want to clean out dog kennels for a living, and he was not interested. What a great way for that employer to find out if it was going to be a good fit. But that was a working interview. On to types of interview questions. An interviewer is going to ask questions in an effort to find out how they'll likely react to a real world scenario. So there's many different types of questions, and you should be prepared to answer any of them. We're going to go into detail about each of these questions on the upcoming slides, including some examples. So we'll talk about personality questions, outside the box questions, behavioral and hypothetical questions, and those kind of fall into 2 different categories: situational questions or problem solving. If this were to happen, what would you do in this scenario? What have you done in the past? And there is a site, and it's below, so it's in the notes here. It's a great resource about different questions an employer can and cannot ask in relationship to Equal Opportunity Act. Generally speaking, they cannot ask your age. They can't ask anything about your family status or about arrest records. Now that's different than conviction records, but arrest records in the state of Montana, unless it's directly related to the job. They can't ask you anything about your protected class or about previous workman's compensation filings or why someone was discharged from the military. Those are questions they cannot ask. If an interviewer does bring up one of these hot topics, well, what should you say then? Well, don't assume that they're trying to break the law. It could just mean that it's an attempt to get to know you a little bit better. So try to reframe the question to get at the root of their concern with grace and avoid the topic altogether. So for instance, if they say, what religious holidays do you observe? That's an illegal question they can't ask. You can answer with, I'm available to work the normal schedule required by the position. It just took religion right off of the plate. And if they do press on, you can respectfully ask how the question relates to the job duties. So remember that if you get bitter and angry about it, that's going to give them a reason not to want to hire you. So you're going to want to make sure that you're answering the question in a respectful way. There is a resource that is shared during the during the presentation here, and also in the online version, you'll find this resource of how to answer these difficult questions, and it kind of goes over each one individually, and it's a good resource, so tap into that. All right, some personality questions here. So tell us about yourself. Now, the first few questions that they're going to ask you, it can be any one of these or any type of these. And what they're really asking, regardless of how they ask the question, is they want to know why they should hire you, how you're the best candidate, and why do you want to do this job. It's generally going to be the first question out the chute, and it's designed to speak to your personality. This is your 30-second elevator pitch. This is an opportunity to let them know why to choose you, why and how you stand out from the crowd. How does your job seeker do the job better than how did they do the job better than their coworkers? Why pick them over somebody else? So encourage your job seekers to speak to their accomplishments and to their positive qualities. Try not to come off as desperate to get a job. So what are they the most proud of when they think of their work ethic? Bring that in. So don't recap the resume, don't ramble on, and don't tell your life story. They already read your resume, you handed it in already, and they don't want you to ramble on. So many people are tempted to say, I'm a single mom with 3 kids, and I've been born and raised in Montana. No, they don't care about any of that. Bring it back to your skills and your abilities and how that's going to help them. Self-evaluation questions. So these questions are trying to find out more about your personality. They're asking about strengths and goals and philosophies. If they ask you about your future plans, like here, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Make sure that you include them in the plans. Even if you plan on moving in 5 months, you don't want them to think that, but let them know that you're interested in advancing as well. When asked about your biggest weakness, make sure that that answer can also be viewed as a strength. Try to bring it on to something that can be viewed as a strength as well. Another common question in this area would be about the best or the worst job that you've ever had. Put a positive spin on that and never say anything negative, like, no boss bashing at all. You never want to do that. Oh, here's your biggest weakness. There you go. There's a good example. I sometimes focus too much on the details, or I get frustrated when projects run too close to deadlines. Both true statements, but can also be, viewed in the positive light. Always make sure that you're giving the positive, or even if it's a negative question, like, what's the worst thing that's ever happened? You're spinning it by, this is what I learned about it. Knowledge and technical questions. These are very job specific. So read the job description well and think about what they're going to be expecting you to be able to do on the job. Tips when answering these questions are going to be to give information that tells them that you know how to approach that topic. Point out the skills that you have that will help you to tackle the problem. If you have a certification or some education that comes into play, let them know that. Be honest if you would need training to accomplish a goal, and let them know and express how you welcome that training, how you're eager to learn. A big trend in interviewing questions is to add one random out-of-the-box question. I'm happy to report that these are starting to go away, so that is a good thing. The idea is to throw you off of your game, to make you think. And the best way to answer these questions is by picking it apart piece by piece and using critical thinking skills, but to do that out loud so that they can hear the process and focus on that process, not the actual answer. Talk out those steps so that they can see the way that you think as you answer those questions. One of the worst things that you can do with any kinds of these questions would be to say, I don't know, or that's a dumb question. You want to make sure that you can give some kind of a reply. So I did some research to find out what some wow answers would be with these questions. And the first one is, if you were a box of cereal, what would you be and why? Now, you don't have to include these little wow answers when you're doing a presentation, but I thought you might find it interesting. So one was Wheaties with me on the box. It's kind of confident, cocky. Life and kicks, because my life is a kick. The pizza delivery question. If you were a pizza delivery person, how would you benefit from scissors? That one is used at Apple. One person said, offer to cut the slices smaller for the kids. Or self-defense, cut the delivery time in half. Kind of like that one. And the last one is, if you were to get rid of a U.S. state, which one would it be? And that's from the Great Falls pre-release. The remove the state question, somebody said Alaska and Hawaii because they're off doing their own thing while the others are connected and working together anyway. And this one was my favorite, Florida, because you can find rid embedded in the word Florida. So you can see the way that you're critically thinking out those answers. These hypothetical questions and behavioral questions, these are the ones that are almost certainly going to be on an interview. Usually you'll find 3 to 5 of these in an interview. These questions are almost certainly going to be based on situations that you will likely encounter on that job. So again, you're going to want to research the job and try to determine the situations that you're likely to face. Similar to those outside the box questions, they're looking for you to use your critical thinking skills and your soft skills to solve that problem. So answer these questions similar to a behavioral question, which we'll talk about in just a second. But also think about that business and the position in particular and what they probably want to hear. So try to come up with 2 possible solutions if possible. Consider what type of soft skills they're asking you to employ to solve that problem. So in our first question, it was about time management, delegating and asking for time for help. One solution would be to talk to the boss and ask if you would be approved to work overtime. And another would be to ask a coworker for help. And here you might want to read that question to them depending on who your clients are. So suppose you're working on a big project with a strict deadline and it becomes evident that you will not finish on time. What do you do? In that second question, a difficult customer is creating a disturbance and how do you handle the situation? It's about conflict resolution and communication skills and probably customer service. So we're going to describe our communication and conflict resolution skills that we employ. So maybe active listening, using a calm tone, being empathetic. And one solution could be to calm the customer down, while the other one could be to bring in security or another coworker for assistance. So give those 2 different solutions. And if you can, tell about a situation that you had where you were faced this, well, I did have a situation where I had to deal with a difficult customer, da, 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 da. Explain how that went down. Behavioral questions are absolutely a new favorite for interviewers. They give the recruiter a way to understand how a person has dealt with a situation in the past, and psychologically speaking, that's very telling in what you're going to do in the future in a similar situation. So you can expect to get at least 1 of these questions, and probably more like 3 to 5. Try to come up with a success story in each one of these areas. Sometimes it's not a success. Sometimes it's going to be a failure story, but always spin that with a positive spin of what you do learn or, going forward, what will you do differently? These are going to start with describe a time when, tell me about a time, or give me an example when kind of things. We want to keep in mind that these situations might have occurred at work, but not necessarily. You can use a situation that occurred at school or at church or even at home. The key is to find a solution with a positive result that is applicable to the situation that might occur working for that employer. So if they're talking about a difficult customer, maybe you've never worked in customer service, you don't have a difficult customer scenario, but you do have a scenario where you helped 2 students that were in a class and you were a student as well and you helped them to resolve a conflict. So, similar, but maybe a little bit different as long as it's the same skills that you used. My best option here is to look at each one of these different sections, the teamwork, problem solving and planning, initiative and leadership, interpersonal skills and conflict, and pressure or stress. Think about each one of those and try to come up with a situation where you've dealt with that, and you'll probably have a situation to talk about during any one of the behavioral questions that they ask you about. It's probably going to fall into one of those 5 categories. And there's a great handout on behavioral questions as well. And so you can hand this out during this slide. or, you know, at the end you can give it to them. It's pretty thick. I think it's like maybe 8 or 10 pages, but it really describes behavioral questions very well. And then it gives a spot where here's a question, now it gives an example of one, and then here's a question, now you give the answers, and it breaks it out stage by stage, which is the next slide. The STAR technique. So although it's helpful to approach any question that's asked of you by tackling these 4 pieces, it is absolutely a must with these behavioral questions. There's a lot of employers that score these behavioral questions by giving 1 point to each one of these, the STAR, and if you have all 4, then you get an extra point, so you would get 5 points. So if one person comes in and they answer all 4, they get 5 points, even though their answer might not be great. Then another person comes in, you're the other person, and you only give 3, you forget the result, but you give a great answer, you're only going to get 3 points, and the other guy's going to get 5 points. So you want to make sure that you answer all 4 of those, and I just kind of, I tick them off on my finger, and R is the one that we tend to forget. So let's jump into this. Answer them all this way. There's a couple of handouts. There's I think it's 1 or 2 pages that's an interview tip sheet, and that one really kind of breaks it down, but in a real basic way. So that's a good, it's not, 8 or 10 pages. So it stands for situation, task, actions, or result. The situation is you describing the situation specifically that you were dealing with. So I was in this case scenario. So I might say, I remember when I was tasked to work directly with a coworker with which I didn't get along. That's the situation. The T is the task, and often I think it's more like your role. So what was the task at hand? What were you trying to accomplish? Or what was your role? What were you set out to accomplish? So in my case scenario, maybe I say that we were writing a grant proposal together and had to work closely to achieve a common goal. That was the task at hand. We were working closely to achieve that common goal. The actions, so this is what did you specifically do? So the actions are the activities. Break it down piece by piece. So this is where I would say I wrote my part while she wrote hers, and then we came together to edit both pieces, and I learned that she had many unique talents that I wasn't aware of, and we learned from each other and worked together amicably to finish the project. Maybe if it was conflict resolution, this is where you say, I spoke to them calmly, and I used my active listening skills. I listened to what they were saying and I paraphrased it back to them, that kind of a thing. The R is the result. It's the one that we tend to forget, and it's sharing the outcome, whether that's a good or a bad thing. It's sharing the outcome. So in my case scenario, this would be, in the end, we did get the contract and ended up working closely with each other several times to create policies and whatnot. There's my result. So I got all 4. Now, when you're asked any question at all, it's important that you make sure that your responses are powerful. So use that STAR technique whenever possible, even for questions that are not posed as behavioral. So tell me about a time when questions are those behavioral ones. But another, you can answer even one that says, why do you want to work here? You can answer it in that, the situation, task, activities, and role as well. Another way to think about that is to think, what happened? What did you do? How did you do it? And what was the outcome? What happened? What did you do? How did you do it? And what was the outcome? You also want to read the room. If you see that you've answered a question and you look at the interviewers and you see a furrowed brow or a confused look on their face like they don't quite get it, ask them if you answered their question or if you can clarify. Don't be afraid to ask if if they have a follow-up question either, because now is the time for you to be able to answer it and answer it correctly. Whereas if you don't ask them, you don't get an opportunity to do that. Always stay positive. I can't say this enough. Never ask anything negative about anyone, any place, anything, including yourself. Always keep it on the positive. Even if you're asked a negative question, phrase it in a positive way. What have you learned? What will you do differently? If you could do it over again, what would you do? And make sure that your answers are going to make that interviewer think, wow, that was a great answer. That's what you need to do. And actually, think like an employer always. So consider, what does that employer want or need to hear? in that answer to that question? What do they need you to say about conflict resolution? And give them an answer that's going to fit with the situation you've been in, that is going to answer the question and give them, what they need to hear. This screen is all about that very last question that's bound to come up. It's the end of every interview. It's going to be, do you have any questions for us? It's not the time to ask about salary, vacations coming up that you want to make sure that you can still take, or sick time or benefits. None of that kind of talk until they actually ask you if you want the job. So it's going to be the last question. Be prepared ahead of time. On that little interview cheat sheet that I talked about that you'll want to bring with, and this is where you would introduce that to your attendees of your training. You're going to want to put there's space in there to answer a couple of different questions, but there's also what questions do you have for them. I always try to come up with at least 3, because you never know if one might come up and already be answered. So definitely try to come up with more than one option, because otherwise your one option is out the door. Word your questions in a way that envisions that you already work for them. So there are some sample questions in the interviewing tips handout. That's a good handout as well. Don't ask questions that have already been answered in the description or that could easily be found on their website. That tells them that you haven't visited the website or that you're not paying attention. Ask them something that you wouldn't be able to do if you prepared. And now is a great time to ask interviewers for business cards so that you have their information to follow up with. Thank you. So here's some common ones, some ones that work pretty well. What kind of training does your company offer? That shows them that you're willing to learn, you're eager to learn more, what options are available. What advancement opportunities are available? You want to advance with their company. That's a good thing to show. How are evaluations measured? And I like to word that one like, okay, so how will you be evaluating my work? So see, I'm already hired and you're going to be evaluating me in 6 months. How is this going to happen? And what do you like best about this company? People love to talk about themselves. And, no matter where you're applying for a job, and no matter how meaningless you might think that work is, they're proud to work there and they like their job or they wouldn't still be there. So, make sure that you're considering that. And when you're asking this question, realize that they probably like what they do. Now, one of the most valuable tools that you have at your disposal is a mock interview. Job service offices across the state offer free mock interviews. We can do those in person. We can do them over the phone. We can do them virtually. Call to schedule one today. I cannot tell you how very valuable the mock interview is. I don't think I'd have my job today if I had not done a mock interview. So some parting thoughts for us. Interview trends. As far as interview trends are considered, I wanted to offer you up some information and tips as we consider wrapping up that interview. So let's start with a look at job trends and expected changes. The average job interview lasts about 45 minutes, and this is all on the notes, by the way. You don't have to use every bit of this. You can just talk about these social media and recruitment. And remember, when you come back into this training on the Moodle, if any of this has changed, when I update it to be the next year's statistics or whatever, you're going to see the newest version of that PowerPoint is the one that's posted out there. So always go back to the source to get your PowerPoint presentations and don't just keep using that same one that you have. So where was I? The average job interview lasts 45 minutes, but the recruiter may have already started the process long before you arrived. Some of those current trends are that 92% of businesses are using social media for recruitment. Of the 8% that said that they didn't, half said that they plan to. 87% of recruiters who use social media use LinkedIn to check out candidates. So have a professional, good LinkedIn profile out there that's going to show the best you. Indeed already facilitates automated phone screenings. This is where a candidate is given a phone number to call and a passcode with an expiration date. You're given a short period of time to answer screening questions through a voicemail type service. To succeed, you want to use a landline so you don't get cut off. You want to prepare with several common interview questions and answers in your head. You want to time yourself and follow up with the employer afterwards. The next one is that employers are starting to use text messages as a way to reach out to applicants. So make sure that you have your robo-blockers off. If you're out there job searching, make sure that you're checking your text messages, that you assume that it probably is real if they're contacting you, that you assume that that is a real text message and you're replying. 1 in 5 applicants are, and that's only 20%, are offered an interview. Only 1 in 5. 60% of hiring managers say that they use video tech for interviewing, and many employers are interviewing using traditional interview techniques. They find that those traditional interview techniques don't quite assess soft skills very well, and they don't identify weaknesses very well, and they're a waste of time. So many of them are turning to job simulations, casual interviews over a meal, making it easy to assess your social communication skills, and virtual interviews and virtual reality tours of job duties. So be expecting all of those things. The newest trend, research is so very important. Employers expect you to have an understanding of their company and the business and their services. And you could do that by a simple Google search, checking out their website. 47% of candidates are rejected because they only had a vague idea of their role or the company. So do your homework. People are focusing on upskilling, so your competition is stiff. You'll need to confidently project your value. And although all of the advice on the previous screen is true, now more than ever, you need to prepare for virtual job interviews. This includes phone interviews, Skype or the like, Zoom, Teams, whatever, video interviews, and even interviews led by artificial intelligence. So by a computer program. There are many recruitment tools available to employers. There's things like Skype, GoToMeeting, Zoom, Google Meet, Facebook Messenger, MS Teams, and some use AI features, so artificial intelligence, that analyze a candidate's facial expressions, their vocal tone, your choice, your word choice, your answers to grade the candidates. And this could include anything from automated phone message type questions to an automated option of recording your answers to questions posed to an applicant as they sit at a computer and they're recorded. Or they might even have you write an essay or answer multiple choice questions or playing little games. If a candidate scores well enough, they move on to the human interview. Employers list some benefits of using AI in recruitment as being improved quality of hire, reduced cost of hire, improved time to hire, and unbiased decisions, which I actually think is very realistic. A third of employers said they use AI. Winning over the bot. So it is helpful to know what AI is looking for, so that's artificial intelligence, and how we can win over that employer. So although all of the interview tips that we've presented so far still apply, here are some specific to computer programs. Number 1 is to be aware of the background that you use. A blank background is best, or at least not cluttered and not distracting. Make sure that there's not a window behind you because it's going to cast a shadow on your face. Always pre-check your technology and make sure that you have quality connections. Are your mic and your webcam working? You can test them out very easily. Just Google test my webcam. Be expressive. The computer might not pick up on your expression if it's subtle. Speak clearly, enunciate your words. Make sure that you're not speaking too quickly. Use your facial muscles. AI will notice the facial expressions and the change in those expressions, and it clicks on that, and that's a good thing. So you want to make sure you're using those facial expressions. As everything else with ATS, use keywords that you think the employer is looking for. The same AI that's behind ATS is also behind these AI interviews, and that's one of the things it's going to look for to see if you're a good match. And lastly, like a regular interview, make eye contact, but in this case, you're going to make eye contact with the camera. All right, virtual interviews. They are here to stay. Like I mentioned before, it seems like what the trend is now is that employers are using those as either a first or even a second if they used phone interview for the first one. There are upsides and downsides when it comes to virtual interviews, and the best thing that we can do is to prepare. And also, specifically for those cons. So some pros include avoiding tardiness due to traffic mishaps. You don't have to worry about where you're going to park. It's easy to refer to a note without being quite so obvious, because you can just kind of have one right here handy. And they're more inclusive for rural workers or people that have disabilities. And you may find that you're less stressful because you're in the comfort of your own home, so you're not as stressed out as you might be if you go for an interview and have to meet with a bunch of new people. But on our list of cons, we begin with technical problems, of course. Anything from connectivity issues to your equipment not working, something like forgetting to unmute yourself or having an unprofessional filter on. One thing that you can do here is before the interview, if you know it's going to be virtual, ask them what the backup plan will be if the technology doesn't work. If internet isn't working for one or both of you, is there a phone number I can call? Ask them what the backup plan is. Virtual interviews are not able to scope out the business location ahead of time. They can't assess the company culture or get a feel for the environment. And just as going virtual enables more people to be included in the process, it increases the competition. Virtual interviews offer a couple of new areas in which to be judged as well. So interviewers might be judging your cluttered office or your living room, or even your ability or inability to effectively do the virtual interview. So your IT skills are also being tested. So here are some virtual interviewing tips. Number one, like I said, the equipment is what matters. So pre-test that equipment beforehand. Try to log on early if you can. Check out the software ahead of time. If they tell you it's going to be Zoom, if nothing else, listen to a YouTube video on Zoom, that kind of a thing. Check your computer, the connection, your webcam, and the mic an hour before. So yes, check it days before, but also check it right before to make sure it's working right then and there. In fact, when you're scheduling, ask about a backup plan. Click the button to move on. Log in a few minutes early and ready to go, but make sure that you're ready before you turn your camera on, because the minute you turn your camera on, you're on camera. So remember that little slash across it is going to mean that your camera's off, and if you click that again, then it will turn it on. So just be ready when you do click it. Stand instead of sitting. Think about your posture. It makes a huge difference just standing, and it helps you to project better as well. If you have more than one monitor, put the screen where you're talking to the people on the monitor that has the camera on it. So if you have more than one monitor, make sure that you're focused on the one that has the camera. Reduce distractions. So this is about the computer, so close all other noise-making apps. So anything that you have, like an Outlook that's going to go bing because you have a new message, to a phone ringing, and also distractions in person. Put the dogs outside, turn off the radio or the TV, put your telephone on mute so that it doesn't ring in the middle of the interview. Oh, I think that's the next one. Set your phone to silent. Have a printed copy of your resume and your job description handy, even though it's virtually. They might ask about it. They might say, I see in your resume you mentioned, and they want you to talk about it. So make sure you have it out in front of you. You could even jot down a note or two, like in the sides or the margins. Just don't read from it, word for word. That's not going to look great. Even like answers to your questions. You don't want to do that. Make eye contact. We've talked about that a few times. Very important in a virtual interview. Make sure that you're making eye contact with the camera. It might help to put a little picture up by your camera. I've got a little picture of my grandson up by my camera. That'll help you to think. Smile. Even just a sticky note that says smile or slow down is what I have on mine sometimes, because I tend to talk a little bit fast, and so it reminds me to talk quiet or to talk slower. And your body language, make sure that you're smiling, but also make sure that you're using your hand gestures and whatnot. If you're using hand gestures, you want to be away enough from the camera so that they can see it, because if you're up here and you're doing, using your hands, they can't even see that. And building rapport, this is important in person where we're using small talk, but it's also important in a virtual setting. So in order to build rapport, a good thing to talk about in a virtual meeting might be to ask what their experience has been with different virtual interviews, if they've had any connectivity issues, that kind of a thing. And if you landed a phone interview, make sure that you have unknown phone numbers that are blocked. Ask them what number they'll be calling from so that you can be sure to answer. I know that iPhones very often will automatically block numbers that it doesn't recognize, so ask them what number they'll be calling from and put that number into your phone so that it will come through. Okay, finishing strong. We want to make that lasting impression. We want to remind them that you are the best candidate for the job. Use your cheat sheet to remind yourself of the 3 things that you want to make sure that they know about you. Usually they'll say, is there anything else that you want to talk about? This is where in the interview cheat sheet, you can put in your little elevator pitch, just a short couple sentences. 3 things you want to make sure that they know about you before you leave, and the value that you bring to their organization. So if you want them to know about you, your education, your experience, whatever that is, make sure you put that, and then how you can benefit their company. Thank them for their time, shake their hand, and let them know that you're looking forward to hearing from them soon. It's not horrible here to ask them how long they think it's going to be before they make a decision. That's okay and workable here. Now, within 24 hours, you're going to write a thank you note or thank you email. The 5-part thank you template. Now, keep in mind, people ask me all the time, is it better to write a personal note or is it better to do an email? I say to take that, it's okay to send an email if it's been the preferred contact method so far. So follow the employee's lead, or the employer's lead. If they've been, if they've been communicating with you via email, sure, send it via email. There's a couple things to remember. If you do it in person, it's more personable. If it's a handwritten note, it is more personable. It's also going to take longer because it's probably going to take 24 to 48 hours from the time that you mail it to get it in their hands. You send an email, it's going to get to them right away. So kind of twofold there. In that 5-part template, and you'll find as a resource, you'll find some sample notes. There's, I think, 4 different sample notes that you can sure pull the verbiage out of and use that for yourself or help it to kind of inspire you. But you're going to want to tell them how much you appreciated the meeting. That's their thank you part. Thank you for inviting me to an interview. I appreciated that. Something specific about the interview or the items that you discussed. So this is reminding them about you personally. You want to make sure that they have a memory of the things that you talked about during your interview, why you're excited about this opportunity, a brief explanation of why you'd be a great fit for the job, and next steps and your contact information. So remind them who you are and how they can get a hold of you. And I usually just give the best way to get a hold of you. So if that's email, put your email address. If it's phone, give your phone number. Now, next we have top 10 interview mistakes. And I think that these are really important. I mentioned in the notes that this is in no particular order. It's not like worst to best or anything like that. So we have arriving late. That's really bad. And by the way, 5 minutes early is late. So always come at least 5 minutes early, if not more. You want it, the earlier you get there, the more confident you'll be and the more prepared that you'll be. If you come scooting in there at 11:59 and your meeting is at 12, you're going to feel like you're running late and like you just barely got there in time. So make sure that you're, early. An unprofessional personal appearance, that disheveled attitude. The disheveled look and appearance will also project to your attitude. Not bringing a resume with you. In fact, bring several in case there's several different people that are interviewing you. A general lack of enthusiasm for the company. They want you to be excited to work for them. So make sure that you offer up everything that you can to make sure that they realize that you're excited to work for them. Talking bad about past employers, but really anything at all. Just don't talk bad. An inability to take criticism. We've all made mistakes, and so it's what we do after the mistake and how we've learned from that we want to focus on. But yeah, you need to take that criticism. Talking too much. Silence does not need to always be filled, especially in an interview. What you'll find is that the interviewer has to have some time to write down the notes. And if you've ever interviewed anyone, you know that it takes a little while to write down your notes. And if you're one of those people that feel like the silence need to be filled because they're not talking, you keep talking, and then that just draws out that note-taking time. You have to give them time to finish the note. And you can always say, does that answer your question? Do you have any other questions for me or any follow-up questions? And then you can see if you gave them enough information. Not prepared to ask questions. That last question, do you have any questions for me? You want to make sure that you have at least one question for them. Forgetting to follow up. Very often we say I'll be following up, but then you never do. So make sure that you actually follow up. And following up too aggressively. You don't want to be rude. Just, ask them if they've made a decision yet, that kind of a thing. And I think that this is the second to last slide. And I think this is very important because when we don't get the job, we feel rejected and it hurts our feelings. It's hard for you to go forward. But what we need to remember is that you might be the person that gets selected anyway because maybe their first choice person says no. Maybe they're not interested. Maybe it wasn't enough money. Maybe they got another job. So they might call you back. So, hopefully you get the job. But if you don't, make sure that you face that rejection with class. They may offer that job to another candidate and then offer it to you if they say no. So make sure that you're there for that. Be appreciative. Thank them for the opportunity. Let them know that you enjoyed learning more about them and their hiring process and that you would like them to keep you in mind for any future positions that come available. Let them know that you're still, that you still have continued interest. Ask the interviewer what you could do to improve. This is really huge. They want to help you, and even though they didn't choose you, that doesn't mean that they don't want you to get a job somewhere else, and you can use that constructive criticism and move forward. And, don't take it personally. It's amazing how many people take it personally. A recent survey stated, though, that in today's market, many people have to apply for 27 jobs to get just one interview. 27 jobs. Typically, employers pick 6 to 10 candidates to interview. Of those, only one can be chosen. So the idea that you weren't chosen, it's not personal. That you never know who else is in the pool, and I tell people that all the time. You never know what another job applicant had. They might have had a master's degree where you just have an associate's, and that made all the difference in the world. And had they not applied, you might have been top of the line. So don't take it personally. And in every training, you'll find our little quick recap. So here we have proofread your documents, make sure that all of your documents are in line, that your application, your resume, you proofread it all before you turn it in. Know your resume information back and forward, because remember that, and that's why we say to save everything in a file that's for that employer, because you want to know what you told them. If you said you could do this, you want to be able to refresh your memory and go, oh, that's right, that was that, and I can tell this story. And research is so very important. You want to make sure that you research the business and you know all about the business and the job opportunity, the position. Practice those answers ahead of time. Focus on your positives. Had a great attitude. Practice the answers in front of either a computer. You can record yourself and watch it later, or in front of a mirror and watch your reactions and your attitude. Be early. Show up prepared. Bring your resume and your cheat sheet with you. Dress appropriately, of course. Be engaging. Now is not the time for yes and no questions and answers. You want to make sure that you're engaging with each one of their questions and offering up good information. Ask questions when they ask you if you have one. Send that thank you card. And be tactful and polite if you do not get selected this time for the position, and express that interest in the future. And there you go, our last slide. Now, this slide does let you know that you can contact Job Service for our one-on-one help, but also when you're doing this presentation, you can change this to being your own information, your contact information. You could just take out this call your local job service and put in your own information and your contact information there. I hope that answered all of your questions and gave you a really great idea of how to do this training. If you have any further questions, you can certainly reach out to me. My information is all over the Moodle site, but also you know, all of the handouts are right there for you. You should have access to everything, the most up-to-date version. Remember, you're wanting to come back to the site to get the most up-to-date version, because that's where you're going to find everything once I get her updated.